obsess about free will is maddening. The more I think I've got it solved, the more I find new puzzles. Free will animates my psyche, marks what it means to pick, choose, select, decide. Experts seem no help. They argue free will hotly. Is my feeling of free will real? Can I truly do what I think I can do? Or is free will just an illusion, a trick of the brain? I hear of the Big Questions in Free Will project. Each year, for 3 years, scientists and philosophers gather at Florida State University in Tallahassee, discuss their findings, plan for progress. I mix with participants, follow the trail. Why obsess about free will? I'm Robert Lawrence Kuhn, and Closer to Truth is how I obsess. How to envision free will. Get different perspectives. The Big Questions in Free Will project gives 3: brain science, philosophy, developmental psychology. I begin with the brain. To me, science is bedrock. But the brain science of free will can seem bizarre. How can probing the physical meat in our heads reveal the mental states of our minds? I visit a pioneer in connecting brain activity with conscious experience. I go to University College London to meet neuroscientist Patrick Haggard. Patrick participates in the Big Questions in Free Will project. Patrick, you have focused your work on the relationship between free will and the temporality of our feelings and what's actually happening. How does this work?
So time is really important because time is a good clue to causation. Causes must precede their effects, right? So in response to the original work of Libet suggesting that brain activity precedes conscious awareness and the feeling of conscious will, many people, philosophers and neuroscientists, went to the conclusion that conscious free will and the experience of being in control of what we're about to do is just a stitch-up. It's just a retrospective illusion. And the story goes a little bit like this. My brain activity prepares my action and prepares the motor areas of the brain, for example, to lift my arm up in the air. And then once the arm's actually moved, something needs to be explained. I don't want to be constantly frightened by the movements of my own body. So according to this view, we retrospectively identify that we've made the action, the arm's gone up. Don't be frightened by that, Patrick. It's okay, you planned to do it. So the feeling of willing and intending to lift the arm would be put into the stream of consciousness retrospectively.
That sounds counterintuitive because I never feel after the fact, but the brain will have to fool itself that its sense of consciousness is occurring before when it's really occurring afterwards.
So we talk about the stream of consciousness as if it's a linear stream in time, but the brain doesn't actually work like that. The brain's rather good at rearranging the temporal order of events in order to make the most coherent story.
Okay, now you've done experiments on this.
So if the experience of volition, of will, is completely retrospective, then that really is quite a challenge because it suggests that the conscious experience of our action can never have anything to do with controlling the action under any circumstances.
It's already happened.
Because it's already happened. So we were interested in whether there's any brain signal before movement which contributes to the experience of volition, or is it all a retrospective stitch-up? Is it the case that an early experience of urge and will is associated with an early lateralization of the brain activity to the contralateral hemisphere, and a late experience of urge or will associated with a late lateralization? And the answer in our study was yes. Now, that doesn't prove that the lateralized readiness potential is the cause of our conscious volition.
But it does come before it.
It comes before it, and it's consistent with the possibility that the lateralized readiness potential is the cause of our conscious volition. So for me, that's really interesting because it suggests that something which happens in the brain and is part of the process of the brain choosing exactly what to do, should I go left or should I go right, that may generate a conscious experience of what I'm about to do before I move.
And so what that does is that takes the general principle of how we think about consciousness, where the consciousness comes from, and says that it is not just an after-the-fact confabulation that the brain does, that there is at least a piece that does come before.
You've got it exactly right. So on this view, conscious will would not be a purely retrospective illusion.
Right.
It would be a product of the brain activity that develops and plans and specifies which action we're going to make. Then there's a really interesting question about why is it there? Why doesn't our brain just make us press a button? Why does our brain also give us the conscious experience that we're about to do?
That's a bigger question.
That's a bigger question.
Right,
and maybe we'll have to deal with that another time.
Patrick invites me to visit his lab.
Hello, Jennifer.
To see his experiment showing how electrical activity in the brain correlates with the experience, the inner sense of felt consciousness.
Containing EEG electrodes. And these
At the time, Patrick was working on what he called strong and weak free will.
I've been interested in the strength of individual decisions. So if I choose to do something, can I do it really strongly or kind of just decide to do it? Do decisions come by degrees or are they a simple binary yes, no kind of thing? In our work, we've been using electrodes on the scalp to decode individual intentions, individual decisions in a very simplified and reduced task where you need to decide whether to press a button with your left hand or press a button with your right hand. So we can get an electrophysiological signal from the motor areas of the brain and we can predict with about 85% accuracy which of those two buttons the person is going to press during the 1 second before they press it. As soon as you see the arrow and see the yellow rotating circle, I want you to start thinking, I'm going to go right, I'm going to go right, I'm going to go right, or in this case, I'm going to go left, I'm going to go left, I'm going to go left. So during the whole yellow period of that rotating circle, you need to be preparing the intention to press that key. And you actually press it just when the yellow circle turns green. And we're going to be trying to see whether we can spot anything in your brainwaves corresponding to those intentions. What you can see is a build-up of electrical activity in the motor cortex of the hemisphere in the brain opposite to the hand that the person's going to use. The really interesting thing is that if we present a double-headed arrow and leave it up to the participant, whether they press left or press right, you never quite reach the same levels of decoding accuracy. The signals in the brain are a little bit more ambiguous. In our view, that's a direct electrophysiological measurement of how strongly the person holds to the decision which they will express at the end of this 1 second period in response to the go signal. And the finding is that when we make up our own minds, we don't really know quite as strongly as we might think we should. There always seems to be a little bit of doubt associated with the case of free will.
Brain activity before conscious awareness. But what caused that brain activity? Prior brain activity? Is there no room for me? Am I not a person directing my own thoughts, governing my own actions, controlling my own destiny? Must brain science undermine free will? Not every neuroscientist agrees. I meet the author of The Neural Basis of Free Will, Dartmouth professor Peter C. Can Peter save my precious free will?
Peter,
In trying to understand what free will is all about, we're confronted by the Libet experiment, which shows this readiness potential beginning in the brain prior to my conscious awareness. That means that the brain is knowing what it's doing before I'm consciously aware, which undermines not only the nature of free will as we imagine it, but also the nature of consciousness itself. You disagree with that?
So it has to be the case that, neural activity generates later neural activity. So there's only neurons in our brain. There's not magical L's or anything. So I don't disagree that there's neuronal causation. That doesn't mean that there's no role for consciousness in freely willing, because there could be this other role, for example, that you have to play scenarios out internally and play options out and evaluate them and then select among them. I don't think that the Libet task is getting at that. But if you just focus on the Libet task itself, like we have, we can ask, okay, well, does this readiness potential have any causal relationship with what they call W?
W being?
Being the moment where you felt a conscious urge to move your finger. So the readiness potential builds up, you report a conscious feeling of an urge to move, and then you press a button.
Okay.
So not only do we find no temporal correlation between the onset of the readiness potential and W, the moment of the reported urge to move, we find no temporal correlation between the onset of the lateralized readiness potential and the time of the reported urge to move. Now, the readiness potential, we find, occurs for motor tasks and for non-motor tasks. So that means that the readiness potential is not necessarily linked to motor acts at all. It seems to me to be linked to preparation or expectation of some action, either a motoric action or an internal action.
So what causes the conscious urge?
Preceding neuronal activity somewhere else. My own view is that where the action is in free will is not up here in the supplementary motor area or motor planning areas or even the motor strip. It's much more forward of that in working memory areas like the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, where scenarios are played out. Now, in the kind of task where you're just moving a finger, there's not much sort of deliberation going on at all. You just say, okay, I'll just kind of randomly move my finger every so often. It's what Uri Maus calls picking as opposed to choosing. I think free will is much more closely linked to choosing, to deliberative selection among internally generated options.
So what's the implications of all this?
Well, I think one implication is negative in the sense that the field of neuroscience, in my opinion, took a wrong turn in 1980 or so, and following Libet, in a way, it's been barking up the wrong freeze, so to speak, making a bad pun. It's simply not terribly relevant to discussions of willing. What we need to do is focus on where the action is, which is in working memory and deliberative processing. Finger motion tasks.
To Peter, free will resides in real-world, considered complex choosings, not in artificial, arbitrary, simple pickings.
How do you find out?
But still, sadly, I find no escape. Because brain activity precedes and causes conscious awareness, my feeling of personal mental control does seem something of an illusion. I do not like surrendering a will that is radically free, but I like even less fooling myself. It gets worse. Many philosophers committed to naturalism also reject a will that is radically free. It's not that they deny free will, it's that they define free will narrowly. Perhaps free will's words are woolly. I see Duke philosopher Walter Sinnott-Armstrong, an expert on neuroscience and the law. Walter participates in the Big Questions in Free Will project. We meet at Florida State University during the annual workshop. Walter, we have free will, this phrase we use. What is free and what is will?
Those are very difficult questions to answer, partly because they're so abstract, but partly because there's so much cultural baggage and so much emotion tied into it all that I think it's useful to think about very different kinds of cases without that emotional baggage. So you're at a hotel and there's some pens on the desk and you go, are those pens free? And the person goes, yes. What does that mean? That means they don't cost anything. Or you go to a restaurant, you say, is that seat free? It doesn't mean is it determined? It means, is there anybody else who's reserved that seat? Can I use it? So I take free to mean there's no barrier of the relevant sort. Sometimes the relevant barriers are the cost, sometimes the relevant barriers are the reservations. And when we're talking about freedom in the context of free will and free action, we're talking mainly about physical barriers or psychological barriers to doing the things that you want to do. And to say that you're free to do it is then to say there are no relevant physical or psychological barriers to you doing the thing you want to do.
So the classic critical question is to say, could you have done something otherwise?
Right, but notice the word could doesn't really help. People seem to think it's clear what counts as could and what counts as could not. But you might say, oh, can you come to the movie with me tonight? No, I can't come, I've got to work. Well, it's not that it's physically impossible, it's that it would be too costly for me because I need to get this work done. So even the word could has this to say you can do something is again to say there's no relevant barrier or constraint.
The key is relevant there, because in each circumstance you have to determine what's the relevant barrier that defines freedom.
Right. And that's going to depend on what your interest is, right? If your interest is whether or not to hold someone responsible, for example, then certain kinds of barriers are going to be deemed relevant. It might be relevant that the person is delusional, doesn't know what they're doing. It might be relevant that they are locked into their room. That's why they couldn't leave and get to work in time. Whereas the fact that it's caused in a certain way in your brain, I think would not be relevant if the context is about whether to hold the person morally responsible.
So you would have a fundamental difference between can't mean literally I'm tied to a chair so I can't do something, and can't because the history of my brain patterns is such that it's going to produce this desire.
Right, because after all, our desires are lodged in our brains. They are patterns in our brains that lead us to do the things that we do. And so to say that the wiring of my brain is what caused me to do it is just another way of describing the same situation as I'm doing it because I want to do it. I think it's the other side that's doing the verbal ploy when they say, since it's your brain, it's not really you and you can't be held responsible. Well, your brain just is you. That's where your desires are. And to say that your brain made you do it is, at least in many cases, to say that you did it because you wanted to. And if you put it that way, it's clear why you're being held responsible.
What should I conclude from what you've just told me?
Well, I think what you should conclude is that philosophers haven't gotten clear about exactly what they mean by free. So some philosophers say, if you're determined by the former states of the world, then you're not free. And I want to say, well, there's a sense in which that's right. And there's a sense in which that's wrong. Because there's one sense of freedom, freedom from causation, that's not compatible with determinism. There's another sense of freedom, freedom from constraint and ignorance, that is compatible with determinism. And so once we get clear about what we mean by freedom, then we can ask, are wills really free in that sense that we care about? And the answer is they're free in one sense and they're not free in the other sense. And now it comes down to, well, what are you going to make out of the fact that this will is caused? And I want to say, in the end, you can't make much.
Walter is a compatibilist. This means that even though all actions in the brain are totally determined by previous actions in the brain, still, he says, free will survives. But Walter, what kind of free will survives? To me, if I cannot do otherwise, free will is diminished. No matter how clever the philosophy, free will has shrunk. I'd conclude, gloomily but firmly, that free will is a mirage. Traditionally, free will was the province of philosophers. Then neuroscientists moved in. Perhaps both are reaching their limits. How else to explore free will? Well, babies aren't born with full-bodied free will. How does free will develop as children grow up? Still at the workshop, later that day, I meet Berkeley professor Alison Gopnik, a leader in developmental psychology of children.
There are many, many, many different elements to our concept about something as complex as free will. And as an adult, all of them are sort of lumped together. But if you're a developmentalist, what you realize is that when you look at children, some pieces of an idea like free will seem to be in place really early, and other pieces only develop much later and only develop as a result of particular kinds of experiences or influences.
What are some examples?
The kind of simplest, minimalist idea of free will you might have is the concept of choice, the idea that I can choose to do one thing rather than another, and that when I make a choice, I could have done otherwise. So what does it mean when you say I could have done otherwise? The only way that really makes sense is in the context of what it would mean not to be free, right? So one very simple thing is that you could say, well, look, if I'm not physically constrained, nobody's holding a gun to my head, I'm not being held down, then I'm free and I could choose to do otherwise. Or you might believe that some aspects of our psychology, like for instance, whether I know about something or not, could affect whether I can do otherwise. There's also what you might think of as a kind of Kantian notion of free will, which is it goes beyond that. So think about acting on your desires. So suppose I really, really, really want to do something. I think it's the right thing to do. I can do it. In the adult conception of free will, I can still change my mind. And lots of philosophers have suggested that's a kind of juicier, deeper idea that we might have about free will. A third notion of free will, which I think of as being a kind of Dostoevskian notion of free will, that's after the great novel Crime and Punishment. In the novel, Raskolnikov, who's the protagonist, decides to commit a horrible murder just as a way of showing his free will. Because what he argues is if you're acting according to moral laws and moral constraints, then you're not really free. So a third question we could have is it possible for you to actually act against a moral constraint?
So you now have three categories. Can you dissect them in developmental work with children at different ages, for example?
What we've discovered is that some concepts of free will, the basic concept of choice, the basic concept of agency, rather surprisingly, seem to be there even in very, very young children, even in infants. The concept that you can act freely if you're not externally constrained seems to be there in a very full form by the time children are about 4. But other ideas, like the idea that you could act against your own desires, don't seem to be in place until later. So if you ask a 4-year-old, here's a cookie, and this cookie is delicious, and you really want the cookie, can you simply decide not to take the cookie? 4-year-olds say no. They understand the words. They understand about being able to do otherwise in other contexts. But they think that if you actually really have the desire, there's no way that you can overcome that desire. The interesting thing is that if you ask a 6-year-old the same question, the 6-year-old acts like a philosopher. The 6-year-olds not only say, yes, you can overcome your desire, but they say the reason why you can do that is because you're autonomous. They have these wonderful phrases. You're the boss of yourself. Nobody can tell you what to do. Your brain lets you do what you want to. But if you ask about moral questions, so you say, could you do something that would violate a social convention, or could you do something that would make somebody else sad, then it's not until about 8 or 9 years old that children say, well, it would be wrong to do it, but you could actually act otherwise than by a moral constraint. And it's interesting because there are at least some notions, for example, that think that moral responsibility depends on our concept of free will. And in some ways, the developmental research suggests the opposite. It suggests that we have a notion of moral responsibility in place. And there's lots of evidence that even infants have some basic moral notions and ideas. And the link between that and free will is actually something that's only developing much later. So that ought to maybe make us think again about how we think that ideas about free will, for example, and ideas about moral responsibility are connected to one another.
How to make progress in big questions in free will. First, humility. Do not expect big answers, at least not too soon. Second, diversity. Get different perspectives. From neuroscience, if it's all in the brain, free will, as understood commonly, may be an illusion. From philosophy, compatibilism harmonizes a physical brain of determined cause and effect with a reduced kind of free will. Many philosophers espouse compatibilism. I do not. If I could not do other than that which I do, I'd go all the way. Free will's a fake, I'd say. Developmental psychology helps, factoring free will into separate elements: capacity to choose, desire to choose, morality of choice. Of the free will puzzle, we have parts, but not the whole. Stuff's missing, drawing closer to truth.
For complete interviews and for further information, please visit closertotruth.com. This program was supported in part by a grant from the John Templeton Foundation.